Evening fell on Waterloo. The French army, shattered, exhausted, and leaderless, began its retreat. Under the fading protection of the Imperial Guard's cavalry, the remnants streamed south, not in order, but in collapse. Yet this was not the end of the war. The French would fight on and even succeed, saving men and equipments, buying time for the Emperor to consolidate and strike. Although events were already slipping beyond the battlefield into the hands of politicians, can Napoleon turn the tide once more? In our previous videos, we have witnessed Napoleon's dramatic return from exile, his escape from Elba, his march on Paris, and his seizure of power once more. We saw him strike first, defeating the Prussians at Ligny, while the Anglo-Dutch army held firm at Quatre Bras. We followed the campaign to its climax, at Waterloo, where every assault, every decision, and every missed opportunity shaped the fate of Europe. And beyond the main battlefield, at Wavre, you saw Marshal Grouchy engaged, delayed, and ultimately absent when he was needed most. But Waterloo was not the end, because what followed was just as decisive. An army still in the field, a nation not yet defeated, and an emperor facing his final choices. This is the story of what happened next. At La Belle Alliance, the victors made their decision. Wellington and Blucher agreed that the Prussians would pursue the retreating French. The crippled Anglo-Dutch army would rest and tend to its wounded. Command fell to August von Gneisenau. Through the night, Prussian cavalry pressed forward. Columns were already in motion. Friedrich Wilhelm von Bülow advanced on Genappe. Friedrich von Pirch II marched towards Mansart to cut off the French line of retreat. The hunt had begun. As the French Imperial Guards broke at Waterloo, Napoleon took shelter in one of the squares of his old guards. Enemies closed in from all sides. The Emperor was forced to flee as the old guards stood tall, guarding their Emperor's escape one last time. Amid the chaos at Genappe, Napoleon's carriage became trapped, surrounded by fleeing soldiers. For a moment, the Emperor stood on the edge of capture. A Prussian officer is said to have seized his hat, his coat, even his sword. But Napoleon escaped. The man was gone. Only the legend remained in enemy hands. Through the night, the pursuit lost momentum. Exhaustion took hold. South of Frasne, Gneisenau called a halt. By then, 8,000 French had already been taken. The road to France was filling with prisoners. Far to the east at Wavre, the war had not yet caught up. Marshal Emmanuel de Grouchy still marched. Unaware of Napoleon's defeat, Grouchy's men broke the Prussian rearguard formed by Thielmann's Third Corps. At 10:30 in the morning, the truth arrived. Waterloo was lost. Confusion followed. Dominique Vandamme, commander of the 3rd French Corps, urged a bold strike toward Brussels. Free the prisoners and cut off the enemy's supply and retreat. But orders from Marshal Soult were clear. Retreat. Grouchy turned south, toward the Sambre, and embarked on a retreat that is praiseworthy. He might not have been able to save Waterloo, but he might just be able to salvage the Armée du Nord. Namur would be the key. Time was now everything. At 11:30, Grouchy unleashed his cavalry. Rémy Excelmont rode ahead to seize the bridges at Namur. Behind him, the army followed, shielded by a rearguard of cavalry and Test's infantry. For a moment, the path was clear. General Pirch's Second Corps was already on the move, marching to cut off Grouchy's line of retreat. By June 19th, they reached Mellery. But Pirch's men were exhausted. Pirch had no choice but to halt. For the rest of the day, the Prussians did not advance. At 1600, French dragoons secured the bridges. By nightfall, the army was streaming through Namur. Grouchy was just 10 kilometers behind. The escape route held.
On the 20th of June, von Pirch's men marched toward Namur. They caught up with the French rear guard. Losing no time, the Prussians launched an attack. But the cautious Grouchy, anticipating Prussian intervention, was prepared. The French threw back the Prussian advance. General Pirch's men struck again and again, but each attack was repulsed. The French rearguard under Teste held firm, inflicting heavy losses. 1,500 Prussians fell, and at last the pursuit was called off. The French managed to pass through Namur and evade the Prussian pursuit by setting fire to the only bridge for miles around across the fast-flowing river Meuse. Grouchy's army had escaped. On the 21st of June, Grouchy entered Philippeville. 28,000 men remained under arms. His army was undefeated. His guns were intact. The army of the North still lived. Napoleon reached Paris on June 21st, but here he faced a different enemy, the politicians. The chambers turned against him. Davout, Carnot, and Napoleon's brother Lucien advised Napoleon to dissolve the chambers and to seize power. Others demanded surrender. Napoleon still had 30,000 reliable troops and the loyalty of the lower class. He could have seized power. He could have crushed them all. But he refused. He would not let Paris run with blood. On June 22nd, he abdicated in favor of his son, the King of Rome. Power passed to a provisional government led by Joseph Fouché.
Until then, many soldiers could scarcely imagine that the emperor would abdicate a second time. France had been beaten, but not yet conquered. Emmanuel de Grouchy had already assembled 28,000 men at Laon. The armies still stood in the field, fortresses still flew the tricolour, and thousands remained willing to fight in Napoleon's name. In the southeast, Louis-Gabriel Suchet drove back the Piedmontese. In the Vendée, Jean-Maximilien Lamarque crushed the uprising. France could still fight, but the will to fight was breaking. News of Napoleon's abdication spread through the ranks, and with it, desertion. Then came the invasion. The Anglo-Dutch and Prussians from the north, Austrians from the east, and Italians and Piedmontese from the south. Thousands of Russians on the march. Karl Philipp, Prince of Schwarzenberg, crossed the Rhine with 210,000 men. Along the eastern frontier, fortresses came under siege. Even so, Jean Rapp struck back, defeating Württemberg's advance guard before withdrawing toward Strasbourg. The Battle of La Suffel is itself a tale for another time. From the north, the Allies closed in. The British advanced through Péronne and Montdidier, just 2 days behind the Prussians. Various fragments of the Armée du Nord, along with Grouchy's column, slowed the advance of the Allies while beating a marching retreat. By June 29th, the Armée du Nord entered Paris. Yet even after Napoleon's abdication, the outcome of the campaign remained uncertain. On June 30th, Blucher attacked Paris and failed. He was repulsed, forced to maneuver south, searching for a weaker approach. But Louis-Nicolas Davout was waiting. He tracked every move. For a brief moment, France held the advantage. Davout had more men than either Allied army before him. Minor victories were still possible, which could have summed up to turn the tables. But it would not be taken. On July 1st, General Excelmann's cavalry struck the advancing Prussians at Rocquencourt. The French routed several enemy detachments and sending alarm through Allied headquarters. For a fleeting moment, the emperors of Russia and Austria and the King of Prussia found themselves dangerously close to the fighting. With utmost efforts, the coalition troops managed to contain the French, but the incident revealed a startling truth. The fate of post-Napoleonic Europe still hung by a thread. In spite of such heroic acts by the French troops, Marshal Davout, trapped in political intrigue, was forced to choose another path. As Minister of War, he had to act in the interest of the people of France. This time, not to fight, but to end it. For nearly 2 weeks after Napoleon's abdication, France was governed by Joseph Fouché's executive commission in the name of Napoleon II. Yet the Allied powers refused to recognize the young emperor. Faced with Allied occupation and political collapse, Fouché negotiated with the coalition and ultimately facilitated the return of Louis XVIII. On July 4th, an armistice was signed. The French army withdrew behind the Loire. Marshal Davout, with his cooperation with the Bourbons and the Allies, hoped to preserve the army. But under Allied pressure, the order came to disband the French army. The resistance faded. France was thus occupied and plundered. Louis XVIII re-entered Paris on the 8th of July 1815. Meanwhile, after his abdication, Napoleon withdrew to Malmaison, not as emperor, but as a prisoner of circumstance. Joseph Fouché now held power. Napoleon asked for a ship to sail to America to seek asylum. Fouché delayed. To him, Napoleon was no longer a ruler, but a bargaining chip. But time was running out for Napoleon. Napoleon very well knew that Blucher wanted him hanged. The British would never set him free. Still, Napoleon offered one last service: to take command as a general to the government, to drive back the invaders, and then leave France forever. Napoleon knew Davout's forces locally outnumbered the Allied columns. That would be the right moment to push. But Fouché refused. At that moment, Napoleon still possessed options. The army remained intact, Paris had not yet fallen, and Davout's forces stood ready to fight. A successful counterstroke, perhaps another campaign like that of 1814, might have bought time, divided the Allies, and reopened possibilities that seemed lost after Waterloo. But this time, he chose not to cast the dice. Napoleon left for Rochefort. Maybe he was too tired to gamble with destiny. On July 3rd, he arrived. A ship awaited him, but the escape did not. British warships sealed the harbor. Napoleon hoped to escape France aboard the frigates Salé and Medusa, and eventually reach the United States. Several French naval officers believed there was a narrow window in which a fast vessel might slip through the British blockade. Contrary winds repeatedly delayed departures from Rochefort. The unfavorable weather made it harder for French ships to leave port and evade British cruisers. Each day of delay allowed the British blockade to tighten. By the time conditions improved, the opportunity for a clean escape had largely disappeared. Friends and supporters proposed desperate alternatives: quiet departures, concealed voyages, one last bid for freedom. But Napoleon turned them down. After 20 years at the center of Europe's stage, he would not leave it as a fugitive. On July 10th, he opened negotiations with Admiral Maitland, the commander of the British squadron Rochefort. On July 14th to 15th, orders issued by Louis XVIII for Napoleon's arrest reached Rochefort. At sunrise, July 15th, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte stepped aboard a British warship and surrendered. Not to a general, not to a nation, but to history. With the army gone, the emperor exiled, vengeance followed. The White Terror swept across France. Michel Ney executed. Guillaume Brune murdered by a mob. Joachim Murat, the former king of Naples, shot after his failed attempt to recapture his kingdom. Marshal Soult vanished. General Van Damme left for America. The empire did not end in one battle, but in silence, exile, and blood. Ahead lay Saint Helena, exile, and the final chapter of an extraordinary life. We shall cover the last days of Napoleon in our next and final episode of the series, The 100 Days' War. And if you value historically grounded storytelling, kindly like, subscribe, and share. It helps this channel grow and keeps these stories alive.